6 days before the biggest World Cup in football history, FIFA has a problem. Not a problem on the pitch, not a problem with the players, and not a problem with the stadiums. It is a problem with the people the tournament was created for, the fans. For years, the 2026 World Cup was supposed to be football's greatest celebration. 3 host nations, 48 teams, more matches than ever before, more countries represented than ever before, and billions of viewers expected to watch. But as kickoff gets closer, a different conversation has started dominating football headlines. Ticket prices, travel costs, visa concerns, overcrowded schedules, environmental criticism, and growing accusations that FIFA is turning the World Cup into a business event before a football event. Supporter groups across Europe have become increasingly vocal. Many fans who dreamed of attending the tournament say they simply cannot afford it. Others worry about travel logistics across 3 countries and 11 different time zones. Meanwhile, FIFA insists that the tournament will be the most successful World Cup ever staged. So, who's right? Are fans overreacting? Or is football heading toward a crisis that FIFA failed to see coming? Because whether you support Brazil, Argentina, England, Germany, France, Japan, or the United States, what happens in 2026 could change the future of the World Cup forever. And the warning signs are already impossible to ignore. Let's begin. To understand why so many fans are frustrated with the 2026 World Cup, you first have to understand what FIFA is trying to achieve. Because, from FIFA's perspective, 2026 isn't just another tournament. It's the most ambitious World Cup ever created. For nearly a century, the World Cup followed a relatively simple formula: 32 teams, a compact schedule, and 1 host nation, or occasionally 2. Fans could travel between cities relatively easily. The atmosphere followed the tournament, and supporters became part of the story. But FIFA wanted something bigger, much bigger. In 2017, FIFA officially approved the expansion from 32 teams to 48 teams. The organization argued that more nations deserved the opportunity to participate. More countries, more fans, and more global representation. On paper, it sounded like a victory for football. And to be fair, there are genuine positives. Countries that rarely had a realistic chance of qualifying now suddenly had hope. New football cultures would be introduced to global audiences. More players would experience the biggest stage in the sport, and the World Cup would become more inclusive than ever before. But there was another consequence. A larger tournament meant more matches, more travel, more logistics, more complexity, and, of course, significantly more revenue. Suddenly, the tournament wasn't growing by a small amount. It was becoming a completely different event. Instead of 64 matches, there would be 104. Instead of a few weeks of football, the competition would become a massive operation spread across North America. And that's where the first major criticism emerged: distance. A fan attending World Cups in Germany, South Africa, Brazil, Russia, or Qatar could often follow their team without crossing entire continents. The 2026 tournament is different. Host cities are spread across Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Thousands of kilometers separate some venues. For supporters hoping to follow their national teams through the tournament, the costs can quickly become enormous. Flights, hotels, transportation, food, and match tickets. Every additional movement increases the financial burden. And unlike previous tournaments, many supporters began realizing that attending multiple matches might simply be impossible. That realization triggered growing frustration among traditional football fans. Because one of the greatest strengths of the World Cup has always been accessibility. Not perfect accessibility and not cheap accessibility, but accessibility that allowed ordinary supporters to save for years and make the journey. Many fans fear that model is disappearing. The ticket debate made those concerns even louder. Supporters across Europe, South America, Africa, and Asia began sharing stories online about the costs they were facing. For many people, the total expense of attending the tournament appeared far higher than previous World Cups. Some fans who attended Russia 2018 or Qatar 2022 openly stated that North America looked financially out of reach. And when fans start feeling excluded from football's biggest event, emotions naturally become intense. Because supporters don't see the World Cup as just another sporting competition. They see it as part of their identity. something passed down through generations, something families save for, and something supporters dream about for years. That's why these debates have become so emotional. People feel as though the tournament is moving further away from the fans who helped build its global reputation. Then came another challenge: visas. Travel documentation has always been part of international tournaments, but because the World Cup is being hosted across 3 countries, travel planning became more complicated than usual. Different entry requirements, different regulations, and different processing timelines. For many supporters, uncertainty became a major concern. Nobody wants to spend thousands of dollars on flights and accommodation without knowing whether travel arrangements will be finalized on time. As a result, fan groups across multiple countries began pushing FIFA and governments for clearer communication. Some concerns were eventually addressed, while others remain ongoing discussion points among supporters. Then there is the environmental argument, and this issue has become increasingly important in modern football. A tournament spread across 3 countries naturally requires enormous travel, not just for supporters, but for teams, officials, media organizations, sponsors, broadcast crews, and security staff. Environmental groups argue that the scale of travel required creates a contradiction. On one hand, football organizations increasingly promote sustainability initiatives. On the other hand, the largest tournament in football history requires unprecedented movement across an enormous geographical area. FIFA argues that long-term infrastructure improvements and investment programs will create positive legacies. Critics argue that the environmental impact remains difficult to ignore. Regardless of which side people support, the debate itself continues growing. And that debate matters because football has changed. Modern supporters increasingly care about issues beyond the 90 minutes on the pitch. They care about governance, transparency, human rights, sustainability, fan access, and affordability. The World Cup is no longer judged only by what happens during matches. It is judged by everything surrounding the tournament as well. History shows that this isn't the first time FIFA has faced criticism before a World Cup. In fact, controversy has become surprisingly common. Argentina 1978 faced political criticism. South Africa 2010 faced infrastructure concerns. Brazil 2014 faced protests. Russia 2018 faced geopolitical criticism. And Qatar 2022 generated years of intense debate. And yet, something remarkable happened every single time. The football eventually took over. Once the tournament began, attention shifted. Underdog stories emerged, new heroes appeared, and historic moments unfolded. The sport itself became the main attraction again. That is why FIFA remains confident, because history suggests that when the opening whistle blows, fans focus on football. And FIFA may ultimately be correct. The quality of players arriving in 2026 will be extraordinary. Kylian Mbappe, Jude Bellingham, Vinicius Jr., Lamine Yamal, Jamal Musiala, Cole Palmer, Florian Wirtz, and Erling Haaland potentially making his World Cup debut. A new generation of global stars is preparing to take center stage. The football itself could be spectacular, perhaps one of the greatest World Cups ever played. But there is still one question FIFA hasn't fully answered. What happens if the atmosphere inside certain stadiums doesn't match the quality on the pitch? Because atmosphere isn't created by executives, it isn't created by sponsors, and it isn't created by television cameras. It's created by supporters, the traveling fans, the singing sections, and the people who spend years waiting for these moments. And right now, many of those supporters feel ignored. That's the real challenge facing FIFA. Not whether the tournament will happen, it will. Not whether the football will be entertaining, it almost certainly will. The challenge is whether the organization can convince supporters that the World Cup still belongs to them. Because if enough fans stop believing that, the consequences could extend far beyond 2026. And that's where this story becomes even bigger than one tournament. And that's why the 2026 World Cup feels like a turning point. Not because of who wins the trophy, and not because of who scores the most goals. It is because of what this tournament represents. For decades, football has sold the World Cup as the ultimate celebration of the sport, a moment where every nation, every fan, and every football culture comes together. But many supporters are starting to ask a difficult question. Is the World Cup still being built for football fans? Or is it being built for corporations, sponsors, and television deals? That's the debate sitting underneath everything we've discussed. The ticket prices, the travel concerns, the environmental criticism, the growing frustration from supporter groups. They're all connected to the same fear. The fear that football's biggest tournament is becoming less accessible to the people who made it special in the first place. And if that sounds dramatic, remember something important. The World Cup is different from every other sporting event on Earth. The Super Bowl is huge, the Olympics are enormous, the Champions League final is legendary, but nothing brings together the entire football world quite like the World Cup. Every 4 years, billions of people stop what they're doing and pay attention. Entire countries become united, unknown players become national heroes, and history gets written. That's why fans care so much, because this tournament belongs to them emotionally. They've invested decades of passion into it, and when supporters feel disconnected from that experience, they're going to speak up, loudly. The irony is that despite all the criticism, the football itself could still be incredible, maybe even unforgettable. The expanded format will introduce nations we've never seen before. New stars will emerge, underdogs will shock favorites, and records will be broken. And somewhere during those 104 matches, there will almost certainly be moments that remind us exactly why we fell in love with this sport. That's what football always does. No matter how much controversy surrounds it, and no matter how many debates dominate the headlines, the game finds a way to pull people back in, which creates a fascinating possibility. What if both sides are right? What if supporters are correct about the problems? And what if the tournament still delivers unforgettable football anyway? Because that's probably the most realistic outcome. The World Cup can be spectacular on the pitch, while still raising serious questions off it. And when the final whistle blows in July 2026, FIFA won't just be judged on who lifted the trophy. It will be judged on whether it protected the spirit of the tournament itself, whether it listened to supporters, whether it learned from the criticism, and whether football's greatest competition still feels like it belongs to football fans. Because if 2026 proves anything, it's this. People don't just care about the World Cup. They care about what the World Cup stands for. And that's a responsibility far bigger than any trophy. So now that you know why the 2026 World Cup is facing growing pressure before a single ball has been kicked, you're ready for the next level. Click the video on your screen right now to find out why some experts believe FIFA's new 4018 format could completely change football forever.